we don't know is ultimately how far Putin thinks he can push this. There's always the risk that he's going to wrench defeat from the jaws of victory, push too far, and actually make Trump decide that this is not a serious possibility for a deal.
Well, today, we saw the United States and Russia meeting again. A lot of that is about how each of those governments, each of those administrations are going to start working together. Speaking earlier, President Putin made some positive noises.
We all see how much the world is really changing, and the conditions of that world too. I will say that the first contact with the new American administration inspires certain hopes. There is work on constructing established relations between our states, and on the gradual resolution of a volume of accumulated problems in the global architecture.
Well, let's speak to Professor Mark Galeotti now, an expert in modern Russia and a director of the consultancy firm Mayak Intelligence. Good evening to you, Mark. Great to speak to you again.
Hi there.
We've heard Donald Trump again today essentially call Putin a good guy. He gave him his endorsement again. So that seems firmly pinned on the board, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, again, we have to always to be cautious about Donald Trump. He says things, they don't necessarily always translate into policy implications. But at the moment, he's clearly putting a really strong push on this idea of rebuilding the US-Russian relationship.
It's certainly. And there were discussions today. Was it about asking the question, really, of whether both nations can get on? The Kremlin last year, of course, described relations under Joe Biden, admittedly, as below zero. So is that what today was about in Istanbul between the US and Russia?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, what's fascinating is that these talks, closed-door talks between officials, are at once really important and really boring. You know, after the big high-profile ones where you had Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov meeting his American counterpart, Marco Rubio, to, in a way, unlock the process, now you've got the experts sitting down to actually turn this into reality. Things like, you know, basically reopening up a lot of the capacity in each other's embassies, that kind of stuff. You know, they're really that sense of actually trying to get a diplomatic relationship back on track after a period in which, well, I mean, Putin himself actually used the term war once to describe Russia's relationship with the West. So things do seem to be moving.
No reassurance really still from Donald Trump about security guarantees for UK and French peacekeeping troops, other than if there's a minerals deal, then there'll be US boots on the ground, US workers on the ground anyway. And so therefore, it is within Russia's interests not to invade any further or re-invade, however you want to term it, and that would be enough of a security backstop. But Russia has continually indicated that it's a red line for them, European boots on the ground as part of a peacekeeping force. Do you think they'll end up relenting on that?
I suppose it really depends how much political capital Trump himself was willing to put behind this. He has made it clear through his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, that any such deployment would not be under the NATO umbrella. So in other words, if there were British or French or whoever troops in Ukraine and anything happened to them, it would not count as a sort of Article 5 NATO issue, which already kind of strips away some of their protection. I mean, clearly, from Trump's point of view, he's looking to basically minimize America's commitment. And in that context, if he can therefore use British or French troops to avoid there having to be any American commitment, then he might be in favor of it. And the Russians might have to swallow it. But at the moment, in a way, any kind of deal is so far away that Trump himself can basically say whatever he wants because he's not actually going to be called to actually make that into a reality yet.
Do you believe Russia genuinely wants peace now, Mark?
All one can really say is there are a lot of people around Putin who clearly do want peace, particularly because there's concerns about 2026. The economy might well run into real problems there, and these stockpiles of Soviet-era tanks and other kit that they have been kind of refurbishing and using in war will basically be run out. So there are people who are trying to hint to Putin that this is a good time to take a deal. What we don't know is ultimately how far Putin thinks he can push this. There's always the risk that he's going to wrench defeat from the jaws of victory, push too far, and actually make Trump decide that this is not a serious possibility for a deal.
Look, really interesting to speak to you as ever. Professor Mark Galeotti, an expert in modern Russia, director of consultancy firm Mayak Intelligence. And of course, you can often read Mark in the Times, in the Sunday Times.
You know, a big part of the problem was Russia for many, many years, long before Putin said you could never have NATO involved with Ukraine. Now, they've said that. That's been, like, written in stone. And somewhere along the line, Biden said, no, they should be able to join NATO. Well, then Russia has somebody right on their doorstep, and I could understand their feeling about that.
You're willing to make?
Well, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that because it's in, you know, we're talking about Europe as their next door neighbor. But we're going to make sure everything goes well. And as you know, we'll be making we'll be really partnering with Ukraine in terms of rare earth. We very much need rare earth. They have great rare earth.
Supplies mainly for quarantine. We're watching it. We put out a post.
He's a very smart guy. He's a very cunning person. But I've dealt with some people that I've dealt with some really bad people. But I will tell you, as far as this is concerned, you have to understand, he had no intention, in my opinion, of settling this war. I think he wanted the whole thing. When I got elected, we spoke, and I think we're going to have a deal. I can't guarantee that. You know, a deal is a deal. Lots of crazy things happen in deals, right? But I think we're going to have a deal. If I didn't get elected, I believe he would have just continued to go through Ukraine, and over a period of time, a lot of people would have been killed, would have lasted for a period of time. And the reason that Ukraine, and I have great respect for the Ukraine as fighters, they have great fighters, but without our equipment, that war would have been over, like people said, in a very short period of time.
Does he have to make concessions, President Putin?
Yeah, he will. He's going to have to. And I believe that because we got elected, that war will come to an end. And I also believe if we didn't get elected, if this administration didn't win the election by a lot, that war would go on for a long time, and he would want to take the whole thing. The big question I had is, does he want to take the whole thing? But the reason, and the Ukrainians are good fighters, I have to say, but without the equipment, without our equipment, we have the best equipment in the world. We have the best military equipment in the world. Without our equipment, that would have been over very quickly.
What concessions would you like to see? What concessions would you like to see?
Oh, I don't want to tell right now, but I can tell you that NATO you can forget about. I think that's probably the reason the whole thing started. Thank you very much. Pulitzer Prize.